Hi, Save Jerseyans. This is Matt Rooney. You're probably watching this on a Tuesday, but we're recording it on a Monday. And I have the pleasure to be sitting next to none other than Jeff Bell, a prominent figure in New Jersey politics before this cycle. But now he's taking on the ultimate challenge of trying to unseat none other than Cory Booker, who represents Twitter primarily, New Jersey secondarily. So we're very hopeful that Jeff Bell can bring much needed change not only to our delegation but to Washington, D.C. So before he heads over to join a protest of Harry Reid a little bit later today, he was nice enough to stop by. So Jeff, thanks for talking to Save Jersey.
Great to be here, Matt.
Well, we're happy to have you, and we are wishing that you win more than you could possibly imagine. Cory, and he's a likable guy, but he's an empty suit, and I think he was a failure for Newark, and I don't think he's done much in his first year down in D.C. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. It's August, and attention of the American people is just now beginning to turn to these midterm elections that are crucial, not just for New Jersey, but for our country. So as people get to know you, or in some cases reacquaint themselves with you, I thought maybe you could give us a brief little introduction to who you are and how you decided to run this year. What we're looking for is basically your 1-minute intro you might give if you ran into a supporter at a rally or were knocking some doors in Camden County.
Well, I guess the best way to sum me up is I'm a political junkie and a policy wonk. I've enjoyed both of those roles. I was working in presidential campaigns as early as the '68 Nixon campaign, and I worked twice for Reagan, 76 and 80. This is my third U.S. Senate race in New Jersey, 78, 82, and now this year I'm the Republican nominee 36 years after I was the first time, so that's kind of an odd sensation. But the truth is, I'm here because I have great experience of the people of New Jersey being willing to listen to a new idea, to something that can get the economy in particular off of gridlock, which it's on now. And even though I didn't defeat Bill Bradley when I ran against him in the general election in '78, my ideas got out there. My primary, when I defeated Senator Clifford Case, came on the same day that Proposition 13 passed in California, and it led eventually through a fairly direct process to Ronald Reagan adopting it and getting it passed as the Reagan tax cut in '81. And later I even worked with Bill Bradley on the Tax Reform Act of '86. So even though I didn't win my earlier races in New Jersey, I had a great experience in terms of the openness of New Jersey voters to new ideas that I would say are mainly on the supply side.
We hear so much about Ronald Reagan in this day and age, and I think a lot of that comes back to the idea that there was a leader who not only had a positive vision for the country, but let's face it, he was a Republican that could win. And our party's had trouble recently. But a lot of people I've found talk about him but don't have any direct experience with Reagan. I was born in 1984, so my memories of the Gipper are very fuzzy. You don't have that experience. You have firsthand experience. So what do you think it was about Ronald Reagan succinctly that not only made him a great president, but something worth emulating today if you're a Republican candidate?
He was into big ideas, and the tax cut, tax reform, winning the Cold War, that was a pretty big idea. And he brought them off. He had a laser-like focus on the things that he thought were most important. And one thing about him, Matt, that I don't think a lot of people realize, he made great decisions. He made decisions that were against the grain of all of his advisors. Not one advisor told him he should fire all of the striking air traffic controllers. Not one advisor told him that he should walk out on Mikhail Gorbachev in the Reykjavik summit in 1986. He did it because he thought it was right. And it came back when he went to the American people to describe his decisions on issues like that. He always was persuasive because he believed in right and wrong, and he was transparent and sincere.
Big ideas is the common thread.
I think so.
Your Reagan experience. I think right now we very much have a tyranny of small ideas and easy choices instead of tackling tough challenges, and Cory Booker to me epitomizes that. And I think despite it all, despite his celebrity status and how many things he is working in his favor, this race is close. We've had 3 polls now, 2 of which had Cory Booker under 50%. And most recently, I think it was a CBS New York Times poll showed him just at 50%, but you only 7 points behind at 43%. And for those of you listening who aren't in New Jersey, Jeff Bell, I don't want to take anything away from him, but he's not on TV yet. Most New Jerseyans have not yet, again, either met you or been reacquainted with you in this particular cycle in terms of mass media. So what do you ascribe that to?
Well, I didn't think it would be this close this soon. Like a lot of Republicans, I want to save up and do my things at the end of the cycle.
Sure.
But now that it's happened, now that we've had two likely voter polls, and the average, combining those two, one in June, one in July, is 49-40, and the more recent one is better for me. I think it might have something to do with President Obama. This is a blue state. It went for Obama by something like 18 percentage points, and yet in running around the state and talking to people, giving speeches, I get the sense that some kind of tipping point may have been passed on this presidency, and that might be helping my poll numbers.
Oh, no doubt about it. I think in New Jersey he's even upside down in some of these surveys, which, again, like you said a moment ago, it's a remarkable flip, a very good flip, but I'm sorry it took this much damage for people to finally wake up. Having spoken to the folks who have interacted with you around the state, because you've been putting in a lot of footwork, traveling up and down the Parkway and the Garden State Parkway and the Expressway and the Turnpike and all the other highways and byways. Two common reactions. One is, wow, he's a really nice, smart guy. And you admitted to being a wonk a minute ago. I make no apologies for being nerdy. You make no apologies for being nerdy.
Right.
We are what we are. Yeah. God loves us anyway. The other thing I get from people is, you know what? He talks a lot about the gold standard. And even though I know monetary policy is important, you think people care about it. My response is always, well, gosh, I don't know, but I sure hope they do. Because so much of the economic turbulation that we've experienced in recent years is because of really bad monetary policy, trying to print your way out of these kind of almost self-inflicted disasters. So my question for you is not only do you see this issue resonating with the general public that's going to go to the polls and decide between you and Cory Booker, but how do you explain it to an electorate that, God love them, I think the American people are smart, but they're not always engaged at the highest level in these more nebulous issues? How do you do it?
Well, I think there is complexity in the monetary issue, but the complexity is introduced by the proponents of the present policy. They have what Jim Grant of the Interest Rate Observer calls a PhD standard. They control most of the papers that are written about Fed policy through subsidizing them. There's nothing hidden about that. And they want it to be very complicated. And it really reflects an attitude that's universal in the Obama administration of thinking that everything is done from the top down, that only the Fed can decide where the interest rate should be, how much money to print, that if the American people were put in charge of that the way they were under the gold standard for most of our history, well, they just wouldn't know. They would just panic or they would do something foolish. And the truth is, the wheels have fallen off the paper money system. It worked okay for a while in the 80s and 90s because of Ronald Reagan and Paul Volcker, and even Bill Clinton understood the need for a strong dollar. But since about 2000, the wheels have fallen off. We're getting bubbles. We're getting the rich getting richer with leveraged investments on zero interest rates. The other thing I would say to you about the ability of the electorate is that they understand and they are puzzled by the weakness of this economy. This is supposedly the 6th year that we're beginning of a recovery, and yet we haven't matched the number of jobs we had before the 2007-2009 recession. And wages, there's downward pressure on everybody's wages, and the price of living, the things people have to buy every day, not iPads, which have fallen in price, but food, gasoline, and medical care, they just keep going up. People's wages aren't able to keep up. And the thing that gets the most resonance with audiences is that kids who work hard, borrow money, get a degree, don't have any kind of an entry-level job of the type they would have had 10 to 15 years ago. So these conditions are universal. Savers can't save because of zero interest rates. And when you talk about how the Fed sitting on the interest rates is the cause of it, a lot of light bulbs go out. People go off and they say, that's right, that is right. What zero interest rate sounds great, but it isn't helping me. It isn't helping me to get a mortgage. And combined with Dodd-Frank, it's really harder to get a mortgage these days.
If the Republicans capture control of the U.S. Senate, God willing, in a few months, and you're part of that new majority, Harry Reid is just a backbencher. What a glorious day. What would some of the priorities you like to see in the U.S. Senate for turning New Jersey's economy around, turning the national economy around, creating the kind of conditions where businesses are hiring again after, like you mentioned a moment ago, kind of this unprecedented malaise that we've had during the Obama years?
I think we have to fix the economy. One of the reasons I ran, and believe me, as you know, because we talked right when I was starting, doing something like this is like jumping off a cliff. You really don't know how you're going to be received or whether people are going to accept the idea that somebody is coming back 70 years old, out of the state for 30 years. But the reason I felt I had to try is that Washington, including the Republicans in Washington, are not doing well in terms of providing an alternative. Yes, the economy under Obama has been very weak, but that isn't going to be enough. Voters still remember that George W. Bush was president when all this problem started with the financial crisis. And I felt if we didn't get our own economic supply side solution into the political mix before 2016, it wouldn't be there. And we'd have another Romney campaign where Romney's just saying, well, I can create jobs and this guy hasn't, but without any real specifics on how he was going to do that. And so I tried, when I couldn't get others to do it, I tried to get it into the 2014 mix. That's why I'm running. And I do think monetary policy is what you start with, but we need plenty of other things too. I also think the Obama decline in the polls here and elsewhere has to do with people looking at the world and seeing what is going on. It's appalling. In any given intervention, the American people will tend to be cautious and not want to get involved. But when it all adds up, it's a mess. I guess winning the Nobel Peace Prize is not a formula for peace necessarily.
No, I'm not sure what it's a formula for after he received it. I can't figure out what the litmus test is for it. I mean, as we speak, I think Israel is wrapping up its latest ceasefire attempt, a humanitarian ceasefire, during which we know Hamas takes advantage of Israel's kindness and proceeds to try to blow Tel Aviv into another century with their rockets. It's a horrible situation. Just about everybody, even some Democrats, agree that the State Department under Barack Obama and John Kerry has been incoherent. Where does Jeff Bell fall on not just this particular conflict, but foreign policy in general? I find, Jeff, that my readers in this day and age, I think it's a reflection of the conservative movement in general, fall either in the traditional hawkish conservative camp or they're more libertarian, more of the Ron and Rand Paul camp, that we don't want a weak military, but we very much want to disengage from some of these hotspots. I know it's a big question, but what's your guiding philosophy?
I don't agree with disengagement. I think that's what we've been trying for 5.5 years, and it's led to more war, not less.
Right.
One thing I remember and remind audiences of is that in recent decades, the president who had the least military engagement on his watch was none other than Ronald Reagan. And you have to ask yourself why, because Ronald Reagan was an internationalist and an interventionist, a man who was trying to win the Cold War and actually succeeded. And it comes down to a simple fact for me. The enemies of this country never knew what he might do. I think that the most eloquent testimony of that was even before he took the oath of office, when the Iranians put those American hostages on planes and sent them home, not giving Reagan a chance. Why did they do that? Reagan just said one brief thing about the hostages during the transition after he defeated President Carter, and that is, when he was asked, he said, "I consider it an act of war." End of statement. No threats, nothing else. I think the Iranians got the message.
Oh, it sends a chill down my spine all these years later. You don't want to mess with them. I mean, I remember at one point, I forget who it was, but it was a Kremlin alumnus who said, we didn't know what to make of Ronald Reagan. It's not that we didn't respect him. We didn't think he was a raving lunatic, but he was unpredictable to us. because we knew when he drew a line in the sand, he might follow through. Nobody has to fear that.
That's exactly right. And President Nixon actually also talked about the importance of unpredictability, and he tried to follow that, not always as successfully as Reagan, but it's a simple fact. And if a president is known to have an aversion to conflict, if a president is known to think that, well, we have allies, but you can often split the difference on the merits of a foreign policy issue, if you have a president like that, it's an open invitation to aggressors, and we've certainly seen that just in the last 6 months.
I think another area where the president's enabling attitude has led to problems, and this also straddles the domestic and foreign policy realms, is in the immigration front. Mm-hmm. We have a humanitarian crisis at the border, which, by the way, I'll let you talk about it, but I don't understand why more Republicans don't conceptualize it that way. I think it would make more people look at it from a different perspective. But in any event, we have a crisis down there where we have a de facto open border in many respects. We now have young children from Central America that we've learned are being resettled at various places around the country, and there was a report the other day in a local regional newspaper that some were actually being resettled in Freehold. People are fired up about this. I don't know what you're finding. I suspect that's what you're finding.
They're very upset. I agree.
What kind of position would Jeff Bell stake on this in the U.S. Senate, and what do you think the United States needs to do right now?
President Obama has completely fouled the effort for comprehensive or any other kind of immigration reform. It seemed to many like a good idea after he couldn't get the DREAM Act through Congress in 2012 that he would relax his enforcement of people who didn't come here, young people who didn't come here of their own choice. But trying to fix the problem piecemeal, we now see the result. You have desperate parents from Central America sending kids over the border and with nowhere to go and no idea what they're doing. And this is a consequence not just of President Obama's doing things on his own, but his unwillingness to negotiate. Now, I have for many, many years been on the side of those who favor fixing the system. But the essence of fixing the system with immigration reform is to erect a reasonable legal immigration system, not to just have an ad hoc reaction to the illegalities that are taking place under our present flawed system. We need a legal guest worker program. We need a orderly and closed border that can be protected. We need all the things that Americans expect in our foreign policy and our humanitarian policy. We don't have any of them now. I think President Obama deserves a lot of the blame. I will advocate for a comprehensive solution because I think the crisis over the border today is a reflection of the fact that you can't do this piecemeal. You have to fix the system and give people a legal option to come into this country.
Now, since you're around shaping policy during the Reagan era, let me ask you this pointed question, because I know immigration for our readers is really a flashpoint. They're concerned about this. How would you distinguish yourself, if you would at all, from what Ronald Reagan attempted to do in the 1980s with his hybrid guest worker program?
I identify with Reagan's pro-immigration instincts. Mm-hmm. He always talked about the shining city on a hill as one of our greatest strengths. Obviously, the 1986 immigration bill did some good. It legalized some people who were here, but the enforcement part of it did not work out. And I think Reagan, if he were alive and president, he would want to have an even more comprehensive solution. I think the problem with the 86 bill was that it was too piecemeal. It didn't think through the overall shape of the immigration system that we want to see.
Now, I could talk to you forever and pick your brain about not just policy and everything you've experienced and the people you've gotten to know, but also your knowledge of New Jersey politics. Many of our listeners are fellow New Jersey history buffs, and we could go on forever. Maybe at some point after you get elected, we can do a more extended interview about some of that stuff. But moving before we conclude to your opponent, Cory Booker. At some point, hopefully, he'll agree to a debate. I don't think he has yet. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
But hopefully he'll agree to debate. If you're standing up there on the stage opposite Cory Booker, what kind of contrast do you want New Jersey voters to walk away with?
Well, I do like to keep it simple, despite the implication of your earlier question on gold. But
I don't think you've. Let me just be clear. I don't think you've complicated it. I just think it's a tough topic. It's to me that's the political equivalent of advanced calculus. When most politicians are dumbing it down on purpose.
I know.
I think that was a really good
I have
point.
optimism about the voters of New Jersey. I think they're good listeners. I think they really try to evaluate things. And that's why my one point in any debate I might have with Senator Booker is that I want to try something different to get growth back into this economy. I have a very specific plan. He can agree with it. He can disagree with it. He can ridicule it if he wants. But I have a specific plan that I think voters should consider. He does not. He favors the zero interest rate policy, printing money. He thinks we should keep doing exactly what we're trying to do now, and including believing that government spending is the main way to stimulate an economy, not tax cuts and not having a level playing field on money. And I just think the voters of New Jersey will see that as a pretty important contrast.
And here's one final question I have for you, because again, I think this ties into not only your race, but also what we're trying to do as Republicans nationally. Our coalition is in trouble. And I think a lot of it is not even substantive. It goes back to what we're kind of dancing around at the moment, which is it's not so much what we believe, it's finding people that can communicate it in an effective way, which Ronald Reagan did better than anybody else. This whole libertarian conservative divide. I have a lot of friends that are my age, I'm 29, who identify now as libertarians, not conservatives. And I think that's a lot of Rand Paul's popularity at the moment. How do we reach these people? How do we bring them into the coalition and do what Ronald Reagan was once able to do, which is to get conservatives, libertarian, moderates all rowing in the same direction to beat these statist Democrats who want to take us down a very scary path?
Well, one thing that Reagan hasn't gotten much credit for is that he really was a great reader of conservative literature. He subscribed to Human Events, National Review, read a lot of the great conservative and libertarian classics, and
Deeply intelligent.
pulled together a mix of these things. It was very pro-American, it was very populist, it was traditional, he believed in traditional values, and it was unapologetic, and it was based on the principles of the founding. I think if we can pull together things that are based on those principles, it will attract libertarians. Murray Sabrin, one of my opponents, and I don't agree on a lot of things on foreign policy, but he thinks I'm 100% right on the Fed and the need to reform Fed policy.
And I think it says something about you that all of your primary opponents, by the way, not to cut you off, have been very active campaigning for you.
That's one advantage I think we have in this cycle, Matt. I think that the Republican Party is very united. The polls that you mentioned earlier indicate that. There isn't, unlike when I was running against Bill Bradley, who was a real icon at the time, there isn't much temptation among Republicans to vote for Cory Booker right now.
I would hope not. I've never felt the urge anyway.
And so I do think that we have a unified party. I intend to have, to the extent that my resources make me capable of it, a specific message that says I have a plan to improve the economy. He doesn't. He wants to go on doing what we're doing, which I think was Einstein's definition of insanity, doing something repeatedly that has already proven not to work. And that's where the Democrats are right now. And I think if we're just specific, concrete, and optimistic about the ability of voters to understand us, we have a really good chance to win both in this race and a lot of other races.
Big ideas, strong contrast, bold colors, not pale pastels. I'm paraphrasing Reagan here, but I think voters have a real dramatic choice to make in this U.S. Senate election, and we're confident that they can make the right one if they get to know Jeff Bell. Jeff, maybe you could just fill the Save Jerseyans in on how they can get in touch with you if they want to volunteer for your campaign, donate, make phone calls, any of that good stuff.
Yeah, we got a website that is bell2014.com. If somebody wants to send in a contribution, they can find out how on the website, either by credit card on the site itself or the post office box that we have up in Bergen County. And I really look forward to anybody who wants to help this campaign. It's a grassroots effort. We're not going to match Mr. Booker in funding, but the elements of the Republican Party have been very helpful, including Governor Christie and former Governor Kane, and a lot of people have come forward to help. And I'm very optimistic, and I hope we can get as many New Jerseyans, save Jerseyans that is, involved as possible.
We're trying to get a lot of overlap there. We're hoping those terms are more and more analogous.
I hope so.
Jeff Bell, hopefully our next United States Senator from New Jersey. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so
to
much
talk
for
to
having
us.
me, Matt.
Oh, my pleasure. And if you
Appreciate
see
it.
Harry Reid later today, please give him all of our regards from everybody listening.
I sure will.